Sharonne. Sharonne Price is from Adelaide, and she has a background in palliative care, working with people, training people around how we journey with people. And she also has an experience working with the Presbytery, the Synod in South Australia, looking after the Pastoral Relations Committee. Is that right, Sharonne?
Yes, I chair.
That's right, and overseeing the work of critical staff, working with congregations. So Sharonne has a deep background in working with the Uniting Church, and we value what you bring today, Sharonne. We're looking forward to learning from your experiences and bringing our own experiences to the conversation. So Sharonne, I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Duncan. It is so nice to be here. I'm just trying to work out what's going on here. There we go. So lovely to be back with you all, and this time doing some reflections on a different piece of writing. This time, the little book Soulstice. And this is something that I spent my immediate post-retirement months completing. It had been on the agenda for quite some time. And why? Well, as Duncan has said, I worked for 16 years in palliative care in the early days of PAL care, and spent a lot of time, of course, closely with people who are facing the end of their life. And because it was the early days, those of us who were doing it were asked to do some teaching. And so 3 of us were tasked with setting up a Masters of Palliative Care course. And they know that they needed to deal with the psychosocial, spiritual issues. And so I was asked to do something on spiritual issues. And of course, we worked and still do, in a very secular environment. So how do we find the language and the images and the themes that have traction for people without faith? Of course, this was a day-to-day challenge for us as we talked about things that really mattered to people who were very shy of using the word God, and yet had a deepening understanding of their own spirituality day by day. The other thread about this is that we were also, Ian and I, through MediaCom, were working on, alongside the Upper Room, a project for how do we publish materials and opportunities for exploration for people who considered themselves the spiritual but not religious, growing cohort, both in Australia and the United States. And how do you talk about that to a publishing company like the Upper Room that is based in Nashville, in Tennessee, where 80% of people go to church? How on earth do they understand talking about faith in different ways? So Soulstice was the first, the beginning point really of an example of how we might talk about faith, but skirt around all the barriers that people have around talking about faith. The other thing that happened for me is that if you've read the preface of the book, you'll hear all about this, how we used to talk about people's journey through dying all the time in team meetings, doctors, nurses, social workers, OTs and physios and volunteers, how we'd talk about this journey to the point that I thought that was absolutely meaningless. And so I thought that, and then I tried to do away with it and found I couldn't, that it is a persistent and important theme for us. If we think about story, the theme of journey is everywhere. In fact, the very arc of story is a journey. And if those of you who are interested in literature can, off the top of your head, think of 10 famous pieces of work that focus around this theme of journey. So I spent a lot of time thinking about journey, and what I discovered is that when I gave my lectures around this material, the room went very quiet. You could hear a pin drop, and I was surprised, somewhat humbled, but really curious about why that might be so. Why does talking about this seem to draw from people a deepening of their spirituality? So John Savage, who's written a lot about spirituality, says that there are 5 steps to spiritual growth. There they are on the screen. Know your story, know your own story, pray deeply, simplify your desires, face your challenges, expand your understanding. And I've used this structure for retreats because it stands up. This process, it's not a quick process, it's a lifetime's work, but it's surprising how far you can get in a weekend. So what I'm talking about today is really about knowing your own story, the first step in this. And so story, journey, same thing, maybe not. But for me, there are 4 journeys for us to consider. The first is exploration. It heads to the heroic journey, pilgrimage, and then the journey home. And after many years of thinking this through, I think that most of our experiences can fit into this sort of structure. To explain, they follow on naturally from each other, but they don't always happen in a neat order, and one will intrude on another and take us to a different place. But in essence, exploration and the heroic journey are the journeys of young life. We return to them. I have to keep saying we do return to them, but they're primarily the journeys of youth, and I would say up to middle years. For all of us, our heroic journey may happen for us in our 50s, our 60s, our 80s. But they are where the human spirit exerts itself on the world around it. Okay, so we go to explore. We find ourselves in extremis of some kind, by choice or by circumstance, and it may grow to become a heroic journey where everything that we are is drawn upon in order to achieve a goal or to accomplish our goals, or whatever they might be. And then there is a turning point from the heroic journey into pilgrimage. And this turning point is central in that it's where we begin to realise that life is not all about us. And so there's a turning point to listening to life as it teaches us, where life makes its impact on us and we grow by that relationship, rather than the first 2 journeys, which are essentially how does our soul, our spirit, express itself. Okay, so pilgrimage and the journey home are that turning back, turning inward part of these journeys. More will be revealed. And once again, let me say, stop me at any time. Most of what you'll see on the screen are pictures, not text. And they're just because I think that imagery takes us clearer through this sort of understanding. So what we're engaging in is knowing our own story. It's Proust who said, we don't receive wisdom, we must discover it for ourselves after a journey that no one else can take for us or spare us. So we are not the receptacles of wisdom. We must discover it after a journey. Now Duncan's going to share a clip for us from Wolf Blass.
Triumph doesn't just happen. It comes about because we, as humans, choose to pursue it, regardless of risk or rules or boundaries, because we choose to listen to the voice inside of us that says, chase it. Without the chase, everything man has ever done would not have been done as well, as good at all. So when the call comes to chase something, listen to it. Ignore the comfort zone. It never climbed a mountain. It never created a damn thing. Chase boldly. And when you do, raise a glass to yourself. Because you, sir or madam, are alive.
Here's to the chase. Wolf Blass.
So, so I'm not promoting drinking with that. I just think that's a beautiful piece of film about human endeavour. Human endeavour that stretches us. This is the journey of exploration. And of course, such journeys are at the heart of faith stories, journeys of exploration, of stepping out, taking risks, engaging with the difficult and the unknown. And so it's deeply embedded in our human spirit that we will go further, to explore the beyond. And in, writ large, for us as a human race, there are some of these huge themes, but they are reflected in our own journeys of exploration. We all venture into the unknown. We all undertake journeys of learning and discovery, whether we're 10 or 90. And it's been part of human history, part of evolution, that creatures stretch to the beyond. And of course, here in Australia, we're so aware of it, and living on the south coast of South Australia, the last mapped piece of coastland, apart from Arctic or Antarctic coastland. It seems very recent history. And of course, with that goes the complexity of what is discovery and what is colonialism. How do human beings use their power of exploration for good and for ill, complex issues for us as a human race, for us as nations, but also for us as individuals. Yes, good old NASA. While writing the book, I read so many stories of mountaineers and the early days of the conquest of Everest, and some of the poetry that comes out of those experiences is extraordinary. Some of the writing is amazing as these human beings crossed a frontier. What does it mean to cross a frontier for us as people, as individuals as well? And what is it that we're exploring, and why are we so driven to explore? Some more pictures. For what purpose do people give their lives to this? So now I'm wondering if you'd like to go into some small groups for 5 minutes or longer. We'll see how you're going. So these are the questions for you. What have been your journeys of exploration? Is there one going on now? Why do you or would you explore? Okay. What are you stretching into right now? Where have you been before? What have been the great explorations of your life? Has it been migration? Has it been education? Has it been relationship? It can be all of those things. Okay.
How long do we have for this?
Oh, let's go 5 minutes. So not the dilemma with this book is that it's not the sort of thing that you skim through, really. My dear friend, Professor Maddox, who's an old Senior Australian of the Year, launched this book, and he's virtually blind, and I didn't know that when I asked him to launch it. And he spent weeks reading it very carefully because he needed to translate he needed to put it on a screen to be able to see it. And his wife told me that he spent very many quiet moments, and she was almost worried about him. And so that's the nature of this material, that you think about it. So today we just start the process of thinking about it. Okay? Right. So I hope you enjoyed hearing some important history from each other and some of the things that are on hearts right now. Exploration is really difficult in lockdown, isn't it? And yet there's an internal exploration that is going on for many of us when the journeying out is less possible. So here are some ideas about human beings' experience of exploration. Sometimes when we are driven from here to there, it's just part of how life is, that we need to move, whether by an internal instinct or by others. Maya Angelou, I mean, I could have chosen 15 examples, 150 examples, but Maya Angelou, Wouldn't Take Nothing for My Journey Now, is a famous and important story about her grandmother who had to set out on her own, and how she had to cut a path. Are the words that Maya Angelou uses. She had to cut a path in order for her family to survive in an abusive situation, and how she made pasties to sell, to the little pies to sell to those who were going to work in order to feed her own family. There are many stories like that, but that's a journey of exploration writ large for us. A really enjoyable stretch into this is Cheryl Strayed story Wild, which has been made into a film. Cheryl Strayed was at the Sydney Writers' Festival recently, and there's a lovely Richard Feidler conversation with her. But Cheryl walked without any experience and not much training. She walked the Pacific Coast, the Pacific Crest Trail from Mexico up to Oregon, I think. And her story is a fascinating example of the challenges of exploring, of pursuing this drive that we have. And I'll come back to her when I'm talking about pilgrimage and what that did to the internal Cheryl. Cheryl Strayed is her chosen name because of her life, her wild life before this experience. And of course, I can't help but talk about the exploration of the journey of exploration of Matthew Flinders, and the interesting connection in our own history between exploration for the sake of science alongside exploration for the sake of colonialism, and how those two intersected. Here, I'll just leave this up for you to read, because the journey of exploration is about the growing of character. I'm sorry about the sexist language, folks. Can't do much about it. So by testing ourselves beyond endurance, humans learn to know themselves. So is that why we do it? Is that why you have engaged in your journeys of exploration? Has it been about discovering self? Has it been about discovering other truths? Has it been about discovering God? And when I'm talking with others, I might use the language of touching the beyond. Okay, moving to the beyond, an experience of the beyond. And if you read some of these biographies of groundbreaking explorers, you see this drive to go beyond. So what is the beyond for you? And the interesting thing for me is that some of these stories, there's something in common about so many of these stories. Robert Macfarlane, a mountaineer, and for him, the pinnacle experience of his journey on in Scotland, was his encounter with a snow hare. It wasn't the achievement, it wasn't the physical achievement, it was this encounter that he had, and he said that he was evaluated by the gaze of that snow hare. And Martin Bell, in his delightful collection of stories, uses the image of the silver wolf as the encounter with God. And it's an image that flows through so many of his stories. And Cheryl Strayed, the most poignant of her experiences in her walk was an encounter with a red fox. And it's in meeting this fox that her grief about the loss of her mother overwhelms her, and she calls after the fox and calls the fox mother, mum, mum, and tries to chase this creature. But it's the gaze of something that's almost incomprehensible, that has is part of so many stories. The story of Ernest Shackleton in Antarctica, his perception of there being a presence that walked with him. The story of Joseph Slocum, who was one of the earliest lone sailors around the world, and his experience of having a visitor. It's part of delirium, but when he was really ill, having somebody else come to take the helm of his fairly flimsy boat. So there are these experiences that are beyond explanation. And it seems to me that is part of this drive. It's not just the drive to achieve, a la Wolf Blass, but it's something beyond that. And so I would say that the journey of exploration is usually driven by one of these three: call, curiosity, or hope. And each of these three is really powerful. So maybe as you reflect on your own stories of exploration, you might want to think about, where does this come from? Is it call, curiosity, hope, or something else? And it's my belief that every human journey is grounded in hope. Okay, I'll go through there quickly and we'll get to the heroic journey. Just watching the time. The heroic journey is embedded in our culture. And so often a journey of exploration becomes an heroic journey when it requires all that we have, and that the stakes get higher for us as the journey of exploration moves to a journey of heroism of some kind. A lot of our heroism is very quietly hidden, and a lot of our heroism is known only to us who makes the journey. So the round the world sailors, obviously our space heroes that have had a fair airing in the last couple of years, have they not? And embedded in our ancient stories of faith and our modern stories of conquest, and the classic stories of the Greeks, is embedded this idea of heroism. If you're interested in stories of heroism, read the Greek myths. And if you're not keen on difficult language, get a copy of Stephen Frye's Mythos, which rewrites those myths for you. But of course, in our biblical stories, there are multiple examples of heroic journey. And of course, embedded in our European culture are the myths of the Holy Grail. You know, King Arthur and the Round Table, the stories around seeking for the treasures, what is gallantry, all of that sort of stuff. And in the book, I do a bit of a diversion into some of that stuff, much to my editor's dismay, because for me they help us to understand the romance that we still carry around heroism, rightly or wrongly. Here's some of the art that has come from such stories. And down the bottom, you see my favourite film of all time. I'm not sure that lots of people agree with me, but that's The Fisher King, which is the story set in New York of such a journey to find the Holy Grail. Amazing piece of work. So once again, we'll go back and we'll come back and talk about heroism in more detail, but I'd like you to go back to your small groups for just a minute to think about who are your heroes? What makes a hero? Who are your heroes? When has life forced heroism upon you? And what has heroism cost you? Okay, now you won't be able to get through 4 questions in a group, but tackle something that stirs you to talk with your friends. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry to race you through such a conversation, and what a time we'd have if we could share some of those experiences all around the group. A couple of things to say. Duncan and I have just been talking about how this current situation has drawn heroism from our healthcare workers in particular, but also from family members and caregivers of all types, and maybe from you. It has drawn this a new heroism. The other thing I'd want to say is that our vision of heroism is very culturally determined. It's very culturally influenced, and so for different cultures, they would be saying different things about heroism to what I am, and there's so much learning for us to do as we share some of those things together. And the other thing that I would say is that I've decided to stay with the hero word, but I am very aware of the challenges for women sometimes with the word hero and not heroine. For me, I don't read the Greek myths as being just about men. I don't read heroic stories as being about men. I think women demonstrate some different nuance in heroism, but that's also very culturally based. So I've decided to keep it as simple and basic as I can. But let me say, I understand the nuance that a person listening to some of this for the first time might be concerned about. Okay, let's head on. So why do we undertake heroic journeys? Is it about survival? Is it about power? Is it about the pursuit of a higher ideal of some kind? Is it about nationhood? Why do people go to war? Why do people fight on church council? Why do, and for some of us, it is for the sake of others. So our values are deeply involved in the heroic journeys that are part of our lives. Sometimes it's thrust upon us. This is the loving couple. I can't remember their Christian names now. I've just gone to blank. Alan, and I can't remember her name, but it was illegal to have an interracial marriage in the United States. And they are a couple who loved each other and who ended up having to fight for the right to be married. And so their story is a heroic story that too has made its way into film, but it's not something that they would have chosen. And that's the case with a lot of us ordinary folk. You know, when Jesus says, I did not come to bring peace but a sword, he's talking about exactly this sort of situation where it comes down to something. When an issue comes down to costing us something, then when our discipleship of Jesus Christ actually costs something that looks a lot like a heroic journey. Now, this you will get this diagram, and it's, I think, worth spending considerable amount of time thinking about and working through, because the hero's journey is full of illusions, full of delusions about self. And so there is an internal journey in the hero's journey, and I'll just talk about it very briefly, because that's all I can do in this time. But we start the hero, and this applies to the classic stories as well as our own journey, that we start out at home. We hear the call and we there is a time of decision. We do our preparation. I think this is important for people considering ministry, to think about this journey through the process of ministry, hearing the call, making decisions, preparing ourselves, and then setting out. And then in every story, virtually every story, there is this, our readiness is challenged. So we're not as ready as we thought we were. And there are tests and trials that prepare us for the major heroic struggle. Our values are challenged. And for some of us, it's here that we give up. And when our values are challenged and we realise that this heroic journey is not for us, or it's not a legitimate heroism, or for whatever reason. And then we come to a place of reckoning. How many of us in our lives have not had a place of reckoning of some kind? You know, this is the rubber hits the road time. And then there is the struggle of the heroic journey, and we experience victory and defeat. And it's by no accident that I put in victory and defeat. Even those who win are wounded. The great illusion about our thoughts about heroism is that if we win, we will be better, stronger, have more integrity, all of those all of those things. We think that that might be part of the side goals of winning this battle that we have chosen or has been chosen for us. But the reality is that the heroic journey brings woundedness for all of us who participate in it. And so we need to attend to our wounds. We withdraw, we reflect, we grow, we understand ourselves and the world around us better. And there is a place of awakening, a new realization about ourselves, a new shaking off the dust, perhaps, off our sandals, and a revelation through this period of transformation. And we are transformed, and as we can salvage it, there may be atonement and resolution. Before we spend time at home, and home, the journey home is a significant conversation in a minute, but I hope that you can see that the hero's journey is not for the faint-hearted, because it's an internal journey. The internal work around this diagram is the real work, even though from the exterior it looks like this. Okay, so how we tend to ourselves, how we listen for God, how we build character, how our conflict resolution strategies build rather than destroy, is all part of this understanding of ourselves in the hero's journey. Can't spend more time, we'll move on. So what does it take? It takes awareness, preparation, meeting opposition and challenge. It means taking on acclamation or abuse. And it means winning badly or winning well. It also means losing badly and losing well. It also probably means a new understanding of what winning and losing means. Now, most of us who've lived a fair while will have had several of these experiences in our lives, I think, that are pivotal in our selfhood and in our sense of identity, our understanding of our character, our strengths, our weaknesses, our growing places. And of course, the last thing is that it takes all that we have. Okay, so before we go on, the heroic journey is demonstrated and embedded in so many faith stories. For me, one of the significant stories is Jesus in the garden. In terms of the preparation, and then the testing. You know, if you go around that circle on that slide, you can trace some of those elements of the last week of Jesus' life. And in terms of ministry, as I know so many of you are engaged in ministry, either lay or ordained, congregation or otherwise, these demands will come for us as in leadership. So inherent in leadership are the occasional heroic journeys, and deciding what we will allow to take all we have and what we will not is really important. There are choices all the way around that circle. Now we turn to the last two journeys, and these will be quick because I think you've got the idea by now. Pilgrimage is when we realise that life is bigger than me, that the issues of living well is bigger than the centre of the universe. We step out of being the centre of the universe and allow the universe. You'll notice I'm not using God language, it's deliberate. When we allow the universe to speak to us and we take it slowly. Alan Jones in Passion for Pilgrimage. I will read it out. From time to time, I need to be made to feel the extent of my helplessness so that I can say with complete candour, I can't cope. This is really beyond me. It is at that moment of admission that some new and good things begin to happen to me. I begin to live from a centre other than my self-protecting, manipulating ego. I begin to move in a new direction. My drifting is consecrated into pilgrimage. Wow. I begin to live with my longing. Far from finding myself on a masochistic psychological trip, a minor miracle occurs. I'm sufficiently out of the way for a while that I get a glimpse of what it might mean to love without strings. So this is this turning from I need to do things, be things, affect things, change things, to the living with longing and learning from that which is happening around me. And of course, the Pilgrims Progress, fantastic story. And my favourite part is with the giant of despair and where the two journeyers discover that they have the keys of promise in their back pocket. So this is, and they journey on from horrendous experiences. And W.B. Yeats writes, I love the pilgrim face in you. The journey of getting older is often a journey of pilgrimage. I loved the pilgrim face in you. Okay. And of course, pilgrimage has become quite popular, and I have a theory about that. I think COVID may have changed it, but in some ways, our financial stability has been similar to the Middle Ages, and so we've gone back to medieval type journeys. And of course, journeys belong to all faiths, and of course, these are pictures of the Camino, the road to Santiago. Very, very popular. So popular now that they say don't do it because there are too many people, and you don't get the aloneness experience that you think you're going to get over a 500-mile walk. Mecca. Okay. And here we have our own religious journeys, if you like, to trace steps, to re-experience, to gather something from tradition. This is more about the road to Santiago. And of course, so many of our labyrinths are really the medieval replacement for pilgrimage for people who could not afford to go on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And so for many of us, a couple of hours on a labyrinth is a journey of pilgrimage. So there are those outward pilgrimages, but I want to say that there are these that have the nature of pilgrimage. Grief is a pilgrimage journey for most of us. For some of us, it's a heroic journey, but I think it does drift into pilgrimage. That sense of having to put one foot after the other. And of course, I deliberately put waiting up there when I was doing this last night because I'm speaking into Victoria. My goodness. The sense of one foot after another in the expectation that the journey will take us somewhere and that it will be over. It is a pilgrimage type experience. And for some of us, our pilgrimages are longings. I think about people stranded in refugee camps for years and years, and how helpless they must feel. People waiting for family reunions, all those things. Those are pilgrimage experiences. And what we know about pilgrimage can help us deal with them. So I'm not going to speak much to this slide, but you will get it. And this is the outline of what are the features of pilgrimage and pilgrimage stories. And usually there's a connection of some kind. I'm thinking, it's as true of Chaucer's tales as it is of the journey through COVID-19 in Victoria and elsewhere, but I'm thinking of you all. And so the dangers along the way, a shared road, but still a personal journey. It's a recognition of the importance of grace. I wrote this slide and this material a long time before we were experiencing these things. It's a mature journey. It demands a maturity of us. I'm sure you have some of your favourite pilgrimage stories. One of mine is the extraordinary pilgrimage of Harold Frye, which has come out in the last 10 years, I suppose. It's a delightful story about an old man who goes to post a letter at the post office one day, and he just keeps on walking. He ends up walking to Scotland. And he doesn't even know himself why he must walk, but he must walk. And so there are those sorts of stories embedded in the bigger story of pilgrimage. There are stages in pilgrimage, and so once again, I'll leave that for you to look at. But in terms of what we're experiencing, it might be worth looking at the last four. We listen and wait. We feel inner urges to move towards the sacred and respond. We develop rituals of gratitude, devotion, and we gather relics and symbols. And then, of course, we turn to the last journey, the journey home. I will send you this too in the slides, but this is at the end of Morris West's autobiography, and he talks about being his work being the testimony of a pilgrim, a fellow with a cockle shell in his hat, a staff in his hand with 80 years of living recorded in his brain box and his aching joints. And then he goes on to say, the fact is that we can only survive in communion with our present, our past, and our dusty, footsore fellows on the road. How's this for a good understanding of pastoral care, folks? We are all haunted by a poetry of living, by lullabies half remembered, the sound of train whistles in the night, the scent of lavender in a summer garden. We are haunted too by grief and terror, the memories of random cruelty and the macabre solutions of age. Boy, that man could write. And so this is the experience of living, is in fact the experience of pilgrimage. It's a core journey. And I can recommend, if you're a film watcher, take a look at The Way, the movie The Way, beautiful piece of work on grief as pilgrimage. And it's beautiful pictures of the road to Santiago too. There they go in the film. There they go, these disparate characters that you don't think they can ever have anything in common. But of course, what they have in common is their wonder, whether they have faith or not, despite all the struggles of their life, their experience of wonder. So here we have yet another journey that seems to culminate in wonder. We have it with exploration. We have the challenge and the grinding demand of wonder and encounter in the heroic journey. And in pilgrimage also, we have this sense of transcendence, that comes with making a journey like this. I saw an article recently of Nick Cave, and Nick Cave's got all sorts of interesting things to say. I love him. But he says human beings are wired for transcendence. Human beings are wired for transcendence. And that's the sort of thing that drives us forward. To know the beyond. Capital B. And if you watch The Way, you will see how transcendence hits those pilgrims. So I'm not going to go back to groups for this, but I'm sure that there's plenty of opportunity for conversation around this topic. What might pilgrimage teach us about the experiences of lockdown, and why does pilgrimage change us? And then we turn for the journey home. Once again, Michael Leunig, have you read the stories of Mr. Pajama and Mr. Curly? Have I got them right? Well, where one wants to stay home and the other wants to journey out, and they have this correspondence with one another. Absolutely delightful. But for me, and especially in the area of PAL care, the issue of what is home and what does a journey home look like? Because we can't stay on pilgrimage forever. All of these journeys have shadow sides, and the book covers all the shadow side, or some of the shadow sides involved with every journey. But of course, when does a pilgrim become a nomad? What happens if we can't ever return home for us? So the fourth journey is the journey home. And here you'll get these too if you want to spend some time thinking about home is a place you grow up wanting to leave and grow old wanting to get back to. So you have this sense that home is both the beginning and the end of all the journeys. We would like only for once to get where we are already. A man travels the world over. I'm sorry, women. We're only just having our voice heard. A man travels the world over in search of what he needs and returns home to find it. Home is not known, is not down in any map. True places never are. That's from Moby Dick. Okay, so home is where history and identity converge. It is not always a place. It's rarely a place. And those of us who have stories of migration know that very well. But home is where we mean the most. Home is where we mean the most. And perhaps all of our journeys culminate in this search for where we mean the most. Where connectedness, belonging, and continuity affirm and integrate our stories. Connectedness, belonging, and continuity affirm and integrate our stories. What do they say about old friends? Old friends are good friends because they know where you've been. Some of our best friendships are probably friendships we wouldn't have chosen, but they know where we've been and they still love us. Home is where we forgive and are forgiven, where we love and are loved, and where we are recognised. And this is the red fox from Cheryl Strayed, that when she encountered this creature, it felt for the first time in a very long time that this creature embodied home. Remembering that Martin Bell had the silver wolf that he used to describe God. Yeah, Cheryl Strayed would never use the word God. She would never acknowledge I don't believe, having read her work and listened to her speak, or give a name to this beyondness and the connection of her spirit with it. And so in these chapters in the book, I talk a lot about hearth and table, about the importance of hospitality, and what that means about creating home. There is no place more delightful than one's own fireside. That's a very ancient idea. Home is shelter and sanctuary. Worth a thought, but not worth me rabbiting on about. And of course, we have our stories of home. Our Christian understanding of what it means to be beloved, what it means to belong to God, and what home means for us, whether that's the other side of death or whether we're talking about the lived experience for today. So home is the beginning and the end of all journeys. And there's T.S. Eliot, that famous quote, what we call the beginning is often the end. To make an end is to make a beginning, and the end is where we start from. Rembrandt's Prodigal Son. This is home. What it means to return home. Wesley's painting of the Prodigal Son. At the end of the journey of exploration, maybe the rebellion, maybe the exertion of self, maybe that place of awakening that brings us to turn our head toward home. What have I got? Yes. And our expectation and hope beyond fear, beyond the unknownness of home in a heart of God. Now, the journey, when talking with those who are dying, for many of them, dying is not a journey home. So we need to set aside too many assumptions about what journey people are on. I found myself having to advocate for people for whom their dying was an act of heroism, was a journey of heroism. For some, very few, but for some, their journey was a journey of exploration. And for some, it was a journey of dogged pilgrimage. And so we shouldn't assume that the journey home is the right journey for approaching the end of our lives. For us, it might be a different kind of journey that is important for us, even though our timeline is short. The other thing is that often we all have to make journeys home throughout our lives. There's a revisiting, a reconnection with wholeness. That has to be the core of who we are, and what our lives are about in the here and now might be about how do we find home, how do we find shelter and sanctuary in a cruel and difficult world. So my concern is that we don't think that because I've described these 4 journeys as consecutive, that that's in fact how they are or should be. It's just the easiest way to describe them, to be frank. So my question for you is, how are you travelling? What is your journey right now? What is there to be learnt from it? How do we learn from other people who've tackled similar journeys? How do we care for our soul? And how do we seek out that connection with the beyond? How do we celebrate wonder in the midst of all of these journeys? This is a symbol of spirituality because of its perfect mathematical form, and it is the symbol of going in and coming out, going in and coming out, and that's the element, if you like, of 4 journeys coming in, each of them, and all together. Overall, going in, coming out, going in, coming out, and the ultimate celebration of connectedness and belonging. So I'm going to stop there and see if anyone, I think we have a few minutes left, Duncan, is that right? Yep.
Yes, we've got 7 minutes left.
Okay.
Do you want to...
Sharon,
Yeah.
I was very interested in what's the definition of what is home, and I thought they were lovely and applied to me. But there are so many people, young, 40, 50-year-olds, living alone, struggling alone. Do you think that they feel that defines their home, where I'm loved and so on? It just seems to me a whole very difficult, personally in our, we have in our family, but a whole battery of people who are struggling to think what is home to them.
Yes. And I'm immediately thinking about lockdown, of course, which exacerbates this. And so for me, with a pastoral hat on, I'd be looking at those definitions of home and saying, how do we create as much of that as we can, given our physical isolation? And so, they are the simple things, and we've been doing them for so long now that perhaps they've lost their novelty, but they become even more important. The connection, the sense of being listened to and understood, someone who will accompany us as we try to make meaning out of all of this, despite our aloneness. Because people who are alone are doing all that work on their own of making meaning and discovering their belovedness. All of those things are more challenging, and so the little things that we do are really important. I mean, back in the days, for us, it was me cooking a meal for our whole family. I'd roll up in the car outside each family's house, pop the boot, and out they'd take a meal and pop in the dishes from last time, and then off I'd drive with no contact with them, and we'd all have the same food for that night. So you've got 5K distances. That's very difficult. That's really difficult. But I think that work is really important, that we do that for alongside of and with our people who live alone. Very difficult. Home is essentially about relationships, though. It's not about the place. One of my young friends in Victoria, young school teacher, has got a cat. It's kept her mental health going well, because she's able to give something to that cat, to care for that cat. Seems a bit trite, but it's not trite to her.
Now, Peter Oliver, did you have something to say?
Yeah, just that uniting Uniting Church has an identity as a pilgrim people, and just wondering about that balance that you've brought when you were talking about home and belonging and connection as against the heroic journey.
Yes, I think that pilgrimage is really important for the people of God. I love that the Uniting Church has used that phrase as part of our basis of union, and it's absolutely the core of what we are. A missional church. We are on the way to a promised goal, and we can never let that go. As a community, but there's always that tension, isn't there, between the drive, the outward drive, and the inward care. But pilgrimage is part of the inward care part of that divide. So it's really, really very interesting. I have seen, I'm not sure that this is this might be a non sequitur, but I've seen a lot of people destroy others and be destroyed by the heroic journey.
One last question, Helen.
Yes, thank you, Sharon. I was actually also interested in the context of your palliative care. I've read certain things about people having a faith certainly helps through that journey, or their experience with that in that area, and what your reflection might be on that and the journey.
Well, that's a topic for another day, really. But I think that what people of faith have learned is the capacity to trust. Now, I'm talking about there's a difference between people of belief and people of faith. And so I think that, Erik Erikson talked about basic trust versus mistrust as the first component of human development. The child has to learn whether it can trust or not trust its environment to meet its needs. And we're all somewhere on a spectrum from our earliest experiences about trust. And it seems to me that when we get through all the stages of human development, there is a last stage that is not, as Erik Erikson suggests, but it's actually his first stage. It's that the end is the beginning again. And it is that capacity to trust or not trust through the challenges of the unknown. And so I think there is apart from the belief and all the things that we've been taught and we've learned and ascribed to about what eternity is, about what eternal life means, the here and the now of eternal life and the future hope of eternal life, how all those things, we've had those conversations. And so I think that people of faith can take the step across the chasm of the unknown with more confidence. However, working in an inpatient unit, I would have to say that some people of belief found dying very, very difficult. And that's because, in my humble opinion, what do I know? I'm just an observer and a carer and a listener. But I think that that's because of the things that they'd been taught about what lies at the other side. You know, the separation of the sheep from the goats and the, St. Peter at the gate sort of stuff actually doesn't help anyone die well. And so there are many people who don't avow a particular faith who die much better. Does that make sense? It's a long answer, wasn't it, Helen? Sorry.
Thanks, Sharonne. And heading back now to Annika.
Thank you, Sharonne. And yes, I'll keep it short, although I'm aching to have another 15, 20 minutes of conversation, but that's not going to happen, is it? So thank you so much. It's been a treat to have you for the second time with us, and I think we're very fortunate with that. you've taken us on a journey, and I've scribbled 4 or 5 pages of notes that I don't know if I'll be able to make sense of them. One thing that is in the middle of the last page is that journeys inside journeys, and I think that's you know, the cyclic aspect of everything you've talked about, that you go round and visit heroic journeys, pilgrimage, going home, and then setting out again, and that is a quest that we're all on through all our lives till the very end. And you've fed a richness into that, and I've really enjoyed the imagery and the tales and everything. And yeah, the conversations in my group were wonderful, and I hope that they were in all the other groups as well. And I trust they are, knowing this presbytery. We do that well. So thank you so much, and thanks everybody for coming. And yeah, I haven't read the book yet. I'm looking forward to it. And I hope that we will have some conversations in the presbytery once more people have read it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy.